Hey everybody, today we are in Isaiah chapters 25 to 27. And if you have been following along over the last few chapters, you'll notice that the book of Isaiah has moved from sort of general prophecies about the people of Israel into sort of condemnation of not just Israel and Judah, but all the surrounding nations. That God was bringing a case against the entire world, that the whole world had gone astray. It has become broken, and God is not wanting to leave it in that state, that he needs to get rid of all the filth and evil and make things new again. And this is often sort of portrayed with this really dramatic, hyperbolic language of all these cataclysmic things that are going to take place. And it seems really negative, and we talked about this before. But then you turn the page to Isaiah chapters 25 and 27, and the tone changes dramatically. It goes from these judgments that God has against the nations, against the world, to all of a sudden being very positive and full of promises about what God's going to do and how God's going to make all things new again. And what this is what scholars call apocalyptic literature. So you may be familiar with apocalyptic literature through the book of Revelation, for example, where the apostle John is writing a letter to these churches, and he has a vision of the end of when the Lord is going to come back and make all things new. And if you've ever read Revelation, it's a pretty crazy book to try to sort through. But all these crazy cataclysmic things happen, right? The sun turns to blood, the stars fell out of the sky, there's earthquake and lightning, and Revelation gives us this sort of all these crazy scenes about what's happening to the nations and the world on this sort of global cosmic scale, and it seems kind of hard to fathom. But then, just like Isaiah, there's these small interspersings of how God has not given up on the world. He's not given up on people, and that God's going to do something until we get to the very end of Revelation, where there's this promise that God is making. This is what it's going to look like when God makes all things new again. There's going to be no more tears or crying or suffering, and there's going to be abundance for everybody. There's going to be peace, and there's going to be joy once again, and God will be with his people, and his people will be with him. And apocalyptic literature simply means is a genre to describe how people who are living in sort of crazy and uncertain times give words to what is their current crazy experience. And they often do this by using these vivid imagery and sort of crazy sort of images to help people understand how big and a bit insane the situation is that they're living in, and how God is going to do something even bigger and even more mind-boggling to make things right again. And so often this gets used. Apocalyptic literature talks about how God is going to come at the end. He's going to judge all the nations, and he's going to make all things new. And it uses really interesting language to do this. And this is exactly what's happening here. As we've read the chapters immediately prior to our reading today, we see all this really crazy extensive language and imagery and word pictures that Isaiah is being used about, kind of like the end of the world. The day of the Lord is at hand. But then in chapters 25 and 27, as I said, the tone changes, just like Revelation, just like any apocalyptic literature, where there's a promise of the future of what it's going to look like when God actually does fulfill his promises to come to get rid of evil once and for all and to make all things new. And I just want to zoom in actually just on one verse really briefly, and that comes from chapter 26, verse 19. Isaiah says this, "But your dead will live, Lord, their bodies will rise. Let those who dwell in the dust wake up and shout for joy. Your dew is like the dew of the morning. The earth will give birth to her dead. Now, this is probably not anything that's shocking to Christians. This is a picture of what it's going to look like at the end when God judges evil and makes all things new. And it's a picture of those who were dead coming back to life, being enfleshed again. You might call this, the New Testament writers would call this resurrection, bodily resurrection. And this is a normal thing in Christian theology, that we believe that if we put our faith and trust in Jesus, even if we die, there's going to be a moment where, our physical bodies get raised back to life when Jesus comes again, and we're going to live out this resurrected life because we believe in Jesus. And that's not probably a new or a thing that you've never heard of before, but it was quite unheard of in Isaiah's day. In Isaiah's day, the thought was that, everybody who dies goes to the exact same place, the place called the pit or the grave. In Hebrew, it's the word Sheol, and it simply just means kind of this gloomy resting place where you weren't really alive. You're sort of just this spirit that was kind of resting. You weren't doing anything. It wasn't torture, but it wasn't bliss either. And so this was kind of the Old Testament belief that people had. But then when you get into the prophets, you see things change. Ezekiel talks about a graveyard, seeing a graveyard, and the bones being pulled out of the graveyard and being given flesh. It's this picture of resurrection. And Isaiah says here a similar thing, that what God is going to do at the end is actually give those who have died resurrected fleshly bodies once and for all. This is a foreshadowing of all the things that Jesus talks about. And why this is important is because you don't often see this in the Old Testament. You don't see this picture of believers go to heaven and enjoy God's presence for eternity, and they do this with new resurrected bodies. You don't really see that theme a lot through the Old Testament. But in apocalyptic literature, this is where it gets emphasized, because people said, is this all there is? That we suffer and we're judged and then we die? Or is there more to the story? And God reveals there is more to the story. That's not it. You don't just go to this gloomy sort of place, but there is life after life, resurrected fleshly life with God as your Savior, enjoying the benefits of all His promises. So this is big news in the Old Testament. This is which leads us to Jesus, and we should pay attention. So, I hope that this little glimpse of apocalyptic literature was helpful and encouraging to you. But more so, I think, as we walk away, we should be people that cling on to promises like this. They're all throughout the Bible, especially in the New Testament, but that God is going to make all things new, and that includes making us new. And so, hold on to that promise as you walk into this week. See you later. Bye.